Thank you very much. My name is Ahmed Zoni, and I'm associate professor at the Copenhagen State University. And my topic today is dealing with consequences of the Abraham Accords. It is the consequences of the Abraham Accord peace agreements between Israel and four Arab countries with the sponsorship of the USA. Before I start, it's very important to give you a background about former President Trump foreign policy generally, and as dealing with the Middle East particularly. As we know, whether we are US audience or in international audience, former President Trump foreign policy was totally different from any other president, and he did not follow any rules of diplomacy, or he did not really take into account the important role of his foreign policy advisors. So he used social media, particularly Twitter, to just surprise the entire world with statements on issues dealing with the US foreign policy. This has actually caused damage to the US image abroad, and as far as Middle East, also caused a confusion among countries who are supportive of the USA role in the Middle East. Generally speaking, President Trump made, from my views and other scholars of the Middle East, he made two serious mistakes, which is moving the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, while still the conflict between the Palestinian and the Israeli is unsettled. Second, he withdrew from the Iran deal, which former President Obama, he worked so hard with other 5 members of the UN Council. Okay, so this was really caused problems to regional players in the Middle East and also to the EU. But it is very important to give former President Trump credit also for the Abraham Accord. Actually, the Abraham Accord, according to myself and other scholars in the area, can be considered a positive step forward for many reasons. Okay, the Arab-Israeli or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict became tractable, tractable conflict And the two sides, particularly Hamas and the conservative wing of a party of Netanyahu. Both of them are opposing two states solution. Okay, so in the meantime, we have other important player in the Middle East, which is Iran, which constitutes a threat to Israel and the US. So the Abraham Accord is peace agreements to recognize Israel and to establish a relationship, particularly economic relationship between Israel and two important Arab countries in the Gulf states, which is UAE, United Arab Emirates, which became very important player in the Middle East by virtue of its viable economic development and with high GDP, maybe twice of Israel. And also they have security threat from Iran. So having this peace agreement between Israel and the UAE can be considered a very good step forward, where the two countries' economy will benefit from one another. The second important country in the Gulf states is Bahrain. Bahrain is very important country to the USA because we maintain large naval base in Bahrain, and very much Bahrain one of the key countries to US interests in the Gulf states. The other two countries, and both Bahrain and United Arab Emirates never were engaged in war with Israel. This is something very good. And so they don't have these memories of war and like between Egypt and Israel or Egypt and Jordan and so on. So this is something good. The other two countries which also became part of the Abraham Accord is Morocco. Morocco has informal ties with Israel since long time. Okay, but Morocco participated in 1973 war by sending a small combat troop stationed in Egypt. Okay, but they never really, this symbolic company, Morocco company, they never really got involved in serious military attack on Israel. So from this point of view, Morocco is very viable, and the Jewish Moroccan population is large in Israel. So this is something very good. The fourth country, which is Sudan. Sudan very much is hostile to Israel, and they never they participated in 1973 war also, they send the troops, but the troops really never actually got involved in any serious battle with Israel, but Sudan continued to be voting against Israel at the international level. So actually, these four countries opened, particularly, they opened a new opportunity for peace. And United Arab Emirates and Bahrain are very close allies to Saudi Arabia. And I believe they will not do that without the approval of the Saudi monarchy. And I believe this very good step that will encourage the Saudi monarchy to join these accords. But the Saudi monarchy, their only condition, okay, which they expressed by their king and the crown prince, that they will not consider joining these pacts until two states, the Palestinian states, will be established on the east part of Jerusalem. Okay, Bahrain also will not dare to have this agreement with Israel without the implicit approval of Saudi Arabia, because Bahrain owes Saudi Arabia its survival during the Arab Spring. And until now, Saudi security forces are stationed in Bahrain until now. Okay, of course, I believe Trump diplomatic team was successful in planning and implementing these four accords, which took place outside really the US State Department. So actually his son-in-law, Mr. Kushner, was very much, he used his personal ties with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he himself is a Jewish, to broker this deal. Okay, so personal diplomacy or family diplomacy here was very good. In fact, President Trump, he followed several previous presidents of using personnel from outside the US State Department. Okay, some of them, including FDR. FDR, he used business leaders, and he gives them a diplomatic assignment overseas. Okay, President Nixon, former President Nixon, also, when he sent President of Mobil Oil Corporation to resume talk with President Sadat of Egypt after President Nasser, he broke diplomatic relationship with the USA in 1967. So President Nixon, he entrusted the president of Mobil Oil Corporation, Mr. Tavo Larias, and he sent him to Egypt, depending upon the prestige of Mobil Oil Corporation has in Egypt. Mobil Oil Corporation is a socially responsible corporation in Egypt since a long time. They contribute to education, healthcare, athletic activities. So actually, after the visit of Mr. Tavo Larias, 3 months, the US embassy was opened again. So actually, so President really Trump, he followed the same pattern of sending businessmen to for diplomatic assignment, but in this case, his son-in-law. Okay. So actually, from this perspective, I give him a credit plus. Okay, and also it is very important to consider the economic factor in the process, because emphasis on economic development of the region, of the Palestinians, and the people in the Middle East is very good. So particularly the United Arab Emirates here is playing very important role, and I believe many Palestinians, they live and work in the United Arab Emirates. So actually, this will help the process. From my view and other analysts, it is win-win situation for the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Israel. United Arab Emirates became a tourist destination. So many Israeli tourists within 3 months, they flew to Dubai to enjoy the beaches there. At the same time, many businessmen from the United Arab Emirates arrived to Israel to form partnership with high-tech companies in Israel. This is something positive. But here again, one issue, where is the Palestinian issue here? Okay, the Palestinian issue, I believe it was intentionally ignored for many reasons, because in the last 40 to 45 years, many attempts by the USA and other European countries tried to bring the Palestinian to sit down and talk with the Israeli, and failed. In fact, President Sadat, when he started the peace process with Israel, he invited Yasser Arafat to join them in Egypt. Invited him and invited Bashar al-Assad, his father, Hafez al-Assad, to come and sit on the table with them. Both of them, they refused. Okay, so actually, and after that, Arafat, the Oslo Accord, okay, again, and the emergence of Hamas as a radical group prevented any steps toward peace. So I believe this was also intentionally planned to ignore the Palestinian people, but to give them the opportunity to join if they want. See what I mean? It did not exclude them completely from the process. Said, okay, we have 4 Arab countries now, they have peace treaty with Israel, with possibly Oman will join. Already there is low-level representation of Israel in Oman, and Saudi Arabia already getting ready to participate in this accord under condition that Israel and the Palestinian Authority accept a 2-state situation or solution, with East Jerusalem as capital of the Palestinian state. Finally, I give a plus to President Trump administration for planning and implementing this peace accord, which is called Abraham Accord. Thank you very much, and I'm open to any questions. Yes.
Thank you very much for your comments. One is a comment and one is a question. Are you saying that, oh, thank you. Thank you. Are you saying that you believe the Palestinians in the occupied territories hold the same standing as these countries that have never had a conflict with Israel, that the Palestinian territories have the occupied territories have an opportunity to participate in the Arab Accords? Is that what you're saying?
I am saying I'm sure they are not happy with what that being excluded. Okay, but I believe the Brookings Institute under the leadership of Dr. Mark Lynch and Dr. Telhami, they conducted survey among the Palestinians and 5 or 6 Arab countries. And even the Palestinians who they live in the West Bank, a good number, like 27% is in favor of this agreement if it will help them to achieve their own state.
But of course, Netanyahu has said there will be no Palestinian state.
Well, Netanyahu is a problem. Always is a problem. And what is happening now in Israel is a case in point that the Israeli now are not happy with the way Netanyahu is governing. Okay, he wants to establish dictatorship, other autocratic state in Israel, and even the Israeli army, the military are not happy with Netanyahu. Yeah. Any questions?
Yes,
Any
we have
other
one more question here.
You made some comments about virtually ignoring the State Department historically. Could you elaborate, what is it about the State Department and institution that they don't play a key role in the very reason for their existence?
Yes, the State Department is very important, like any Ministry of Foreign Affairs in other countries, but it is bureaucratic institution, okay, in the first place. So actually, as I mentioned, several presidents since FDR, they have to go outside the formal communications. So FDR, he used several business men to represent him overseas.
Be that paradigm shift, to make a paradigm shift, you have to go outside the institution.
Sometimes in very delicate issues or circumstances. So see what I mean? Like President Nixon also, he has Secretary of State, and this time was Dr. Henry Kissinger. See what I mean? He did not know. Dr. Henry Kissinger was his national security advisor first, and the Secretary of State was different. But he sent Mr. Paavo Larias, the president of Mobil Oil Corporation, because he knows that he has influence on Sadat more than anyone. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Thank you for your comments. I just had a quick question. When you described the move of the embassy to East Jerusalem, you said that that was not a good move because, which I would agree with, because it's not holding Israel accountable to what the paradigm has always been, that the US would wait until there was some settlement with Palestinians. But I almost see the normalization between these states and Israel as doing the same thing. The US administration has given Israel normalization, which it wants for economic, all the reasons that you listed, economic, cultural, all these things, without getting any concessions from Israel vis-a-vis the Palestinian conflict. And I'm just wondering if the US administration keeps giving Israel these things that it wants, what are the carrots and sticks that the administration can then use to bring Israel to the bargaining table in good faith by doing things like Israel got this concession without even committing to stopping settlement expansions, or any of the things that Palestinians have said that they need to see before they come to the bargaining table. And I'm just curious how that dynamic encourages or uses the US's power in a way that's helpful to move towards any kind of solution.
So, yeah, this is very good question. So you are against or not in favor moving the US embassy? Yeah. So what happened? The US Congress already passed law, I believe, since George H. Bush, that the US embassy should move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem because of AIPAC, the powerful Zionist lobbyist organization here. So they managed to influence the Congress to pass bill to move the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But no president after George H. Bush, he was succeeded by President Clinton. He did not do it. He did not, because the president has to implement the agreement. Okay, sign it to law. President Clinton didn't, he shied away. He said, because this will antagonize the entire Arab world. He was succeeded by George W. Bush. He did the same, okay? He was succeeded by President Barack Obama. Again, he did not sign it into law. So when it came to President Trump, he signed it into law, but the timing was not good. From my view, he could have started with Abraham Accord first. And after Abraham Accord became successful and Israel recognized establishment of the state of Palestine in the East Jerusalem, here the US embassy can move to West Jerusalem. See what I mean? So the timing was wrong. See, the timing was wrong. The entire Arab world, 10 minutes from the announcement by tweet, President Trump, 60 Palestinians died. So what I mean, immediately they left their homes to the streets, and the Israeli military forces, they shot them. So it was too much, too early. Any other questions?
Thank you so much, Dr. Zoe, for the
Thank
amazing
you.
presentations. So now I will move on to the second presentations. So we have Mr. Aziz Al-Ghassian and Ms. Natasha Lindstedt from the University of Essex. So I will hand over the panel to them. So Mr. Aziz, if you want to share anything, slides, yeah.
Hello. Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. Thank you, everybody, and thank you all very much for showing up. So my name is Aziz Al-Ghashian, and I'm a researcher of Saudi foreign policy towards Israel, and I'm very happy to be presenting with this project with Natasha, who was my supervisor and who supervised. So we're both talking about this. The Abraham Accords is probably not the framework for peace in the future, but not quite peace. So if you go to that.
I believe that Mr. Aziz is having an internet issue.
Yeah, I think he is frozen right now. Just give him a moment to come back in. And if there's still trouble, I can take over.
Can you guys hear me again? Okay, I'm really sorry about this, but the joys of hybrid events. So, okay. So the previous speaker spent a lot of time on the Abraham Accords and what it is. And indeed, it was something very interesting that it changed the political landscape of Arab-Israeli relations. But I think it would be worth mentioning also that it came kind of, it proceeded a lot of speculation and era or an era of implicit cooperation and constant rumors of cooperation between respective GCC states and Israel. And so, many times it could be viewed also as the Abraham Accords as a manifestation of this kind of tacit cooperation that's been taking place for some time. So it was really a pledge of economic, technical, and cultural exchange. What was, I think, very interesting about it also was that, Jared Kushner and the Trump administration kind of portrayed this as something, something bottom up, something that came from the will of the people, and that the people wanted to see this. This is something I think the presentation will address later on. But, and in essence, what it is, the paradigm was a peace for peace deal and not a land for peace deal, which was the traditional paradigm of the Arab-Israeli relations and the Arab-Israeli peace process. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you very much. So when we look, Natasha, want to go for it, or should I?
Go ahead, keep going.
Okay, thank you. So when we actually look at this, the Abraham Accords, what is very interesting about it is that it's not really a framework of peace. It's actually a series of frameworks of peace and a series of bilateral and trilateral agreements rather than a multilateral agreement. And I think that's what separates it or gives it its uniqueness, I think. So when we look at the UAE-Israel deal, I don't want to go through all the points, but it's very, very wide in scope. It's very, very explicit. Sometimes it does have 12 clauses. Clause number 5 has 15 points. It's very broad, and it's, to be honest, I think the notion that the Abraham Accord was motivated as an anti-Iranian front, is something that I think has been exaggerated, in my opinion, in our opinion. And I think I think what is clear from the UAE-Israel deal is that it really is about the economy. And in May 2022, they obviously signed a free trade agreement, which was the first that ever Israel and an Arab state have ever signed, and the only one, by the way. So Next slide, please. So when we look at the text of the Bahrain-Israel deal, the Abraham Accords in the Bahraini-Israeli agreement actually does not have any clauses. And it actually clearly states that the two countries jointly express their profound thanks and appreciation to President Donald Trump for his untiring efforts. You know, and of course the quote is all there. But the point is that, you know, if you compare this with the UAE deal, really, they're completely different. Now, can we go to the next slide, please? Now, when we go to the Moroccan-Israel deal, firstly, it was signed later on the year. And here it becomes a little bit more traditional. So you have, it's bilateral, at times trilateral, which you can see at the bottom. And I think what this did, and I think one of the speakers, one of the people in the audience asked this question about, I think, the US concessions or Israeli concessions or the lack of. I think it was a very good point, because what you could see here is, for example, the United States, the first part of it was that it was a promise of recognizing Moroccan sovereignty over the entire Western Sahara. And to facilitate progress toward this, the United States will encourage economic and social development. So what this is basically shifting the burden of concessions from Israel to the United States. In other words, the United States was really doing the heavy lifting of concessions for a peace with Israel. Of course, then Morocco and Israel will grant authorizations for direct flights. Morocco and Israel and the US will commit to fully respect the elements contained in the present declaration, etc. And the rest of the text is there. But what can be taken away from this is really, you could see how this is different to the previous ones. And then the last one, next slide, please, with the Sudan. There we go. So it's still not officially ratified or finalized, I would say. They have joined, but they're waiting. So Burhan, this handsome gentleman here on the right with the military uniform, is actually head of the military junta in Sudan now. And what was an obstacle between Sudan and Israel officially joining or lately joining the Abraham Accords, or at least finalizing the text of the Abraham Accords, is that he is kind of running the military council, which is there has to be a civilian-led council in order to ratify it. And that's what Sudan is going in the process of. But it was really widely also believed to be an exchange for the lifting of sanctions and the protection of any kind of prosecution regarding terrorism allegations with Khartoum. So the next slide, please. I think the legacy of the Abraham Accords, this is when we're going to finish this point. The legacy of the Abraham Accords is what's very interesting about it. Oh, goodness. Okay. Sorry. What's very interesting about it is that I think it's much more of a business accords than a peace accords. It was a materialization of interests. And I think also, as I mentioned in the previous slides, it was shifting of the burden of concessions. But also there is an Arab dynamic, and particularly there's a Gulf inter-GCC dynamic, which was that the Abraham Accords was a way of projecting UAE leadership now in a new Middle East. And you can see that even in the Kushner speech when he first arrived in Abu Dhabi, that, you know, he thanked his friend Mohammed bin Zayed, who is leading the new Middle East, and he's the leader of this new Middle East, and etc. And so there was this, you know, now we're starting to see a different kind of legacy between Abraham Accords and the Arab peace initiatives. And I think these pictures at the bottom here, what was also very interesting was that, okay, when Israelis were in Doha or in Qatar for the World Cup late last year, I think the Arab streets spoke, and that they really still didn't find normalization with Israel very palatable. And therefore, and not only that, but I think an institution very close to you guys now, the Washington Institute, and especially the Fikr Forum, conducts, I think, monthly surveys, and still normalization, support for normalization is around 20% in some states. Of course, there's scope to improve it, but what was the missing piece here was Palestine. And I think that was the interesting part. And now how can we talk about, the elevation of this peace, and how can we speak about a new framework of peace? So next slide, please, Natasha. So when we look at the Arab Peace Initiative, we always see that Saudi, as the previous speaker rightly said, that the main condition for Saudi Arabia was the Arab Peace Initiative. And this is also regarded as based on the Saudi Peace Initiative a month prior, but the Arab Peace Initiative is officially the Saudi response with 57 other Muslim states that have signed on to this. Now, the situation with it, I mean, you guys could look at the text on your own. We will kind of talk about it here a little bit, but what was interesting about it is that it was designed to have very flexible language. And therefore, this flexibility offers very interesting things, benefits, as in uniting and incentivizing Israel, to uniting Arab states and incentivizing Israel to reach a deal, but also it could be denied. Next slide, please, Natasha. So while there is a framework of peace, of 57 Arab and Muslim states having a peace with Israel and the two-state solution, why is it limited? The language, because it's imbued and has implicit wordings, it's very easy to deny. And therefore, Israel has always, the political establishment in Israel has always found it very, very suspicious and unpalatable. And therefore, they're always saying it's not negotiative enough. And we claim here that it is negotiative. We will talk about that soon. But it also comes against a backdrop of, it's a direct result of the Intifada of 2001. And then also, when that was declared in March 27th, 2002, there was a bombing in Israel that killed, many people. And so therefore, I think with Israel, it's not a very palatable framework. It has some historical baggage. And it also doesn't address Palestinian agency enough, in my opinion. So next slide, please, Natasha. So this is the Fez plan. The Fez plan originally, it came in 1982, and it was something that was agreed upon. Of course, the text is here, but I think the aim of this is to illustrate the fact that the Fez plan, as well as the Arab Peace Initiative, are intrinsically flexible. I'm sorry, the Arab Peace Initiative isn't flexible. If we could go for the next slide, please. So, of course, the Fez plan, this was mentioned in 1982. Our plan, Fahd plan, which is then transformed into the second, to the Fez plan, said that Israel, that basically this quote suggests that they're willing to recognize Israel. So you're talking about decades worth of Saudi officials and Arab officials agreeing to recognize Israel, but the conditions really aren't met. So this current present time sensationalization of Saudi officials saying they're willing to recognize Israel is very, very, very overdue and very old, actually, and very politicized. They've been saying this for a very, very long time, even in the early 80s. So next slide, please. So I think one of the important aspects here that I wanted to look at tones is that if we look at the tone of the Arab Peace Initiative, we could see that it's actually flexible. Its flexibility is in its tone and the way it was articulated. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So here, if we could have the red tone as demands, green tones as promises, you can see that the Fez plan has a lot more demands and few promises. And I think what this illustrates, if we have kind of a lens of tones to look at this, you could see that it's very transactional, not much room for negotiation. Can we go to the next slide, please? So here's the Arab Peace Initiative that Saudi Arabia and others, and the 57 other Muslim countries, including, by the way, the Abraham Accord countries, are still supporting. So this is it. you guys could read it in your own time. But can you go to the next slide, please, Natasha? So we remind ourselves now of what the tones look like and what the tones mean and the colors of them. So promise, demand is in red, and request is in blue. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now we get to see the fact that the Arab Peace Initiative, through this aspect of tones, is actually is designed to be negotiative. But there is no element here of negotiation. It doesn't say any negotiation here, but it's designed to be negotiative through its language. It's very, very, very implicit in it, and they mean it. So here, this is what it looks like if we were adapt. Of course, we could improve it, etc. But you know, this is now we're moving on to it. So next slide, please. Moving on, I'm sorry, to the next framework. Now, this is the seeds of the Neo-Arab Peace Initiative. How can we elevate the the Arab Peace Initiative? And when we look at the discourse surrounding the Arab Peace Initiative, Saud al-Faisal, who was the late foreign minister of Saudi Arabia, clearly indicates that, okay, the Arab Peace Initiative is actually negotiative. His brother on the right side here, Turki al-Faisal, who many probably seen in Washington, D.C., I consider him, or we consider him in the presentation here, the unofficial official, who's someone who really doesn't deviate away from the official discourse, claims that it is negotiable in these platforms with Israeli officials. And then very recently, the Saudi media, Bibi, our friend here, Netanyahu, who was asked, why don't you accept the Arab Peace Initiative as a blueprint for negotiations? So it is negotiative, but how can we really elevate the relationship? How can we change it and make it into something more present? So next slide, please, Natasha. I think when it comes to really what is new about the new Neo-Arab Peace Initiative, there isn't anything fundamentally new. What we are arguing here is that perhaps we could address a new framework of peace that has more explicit language, like some of the stuff that has in the Arab Peace Initiative. I'm sorry, in the Abraham Accords. So there was a lot of explicit language in it. There's broad scope of it as well. So there is credence in the Abraham Accords and the way it was conducted. So we need to just make it more explicit in language, and we need to make a peace, especially a Palestinian-Israeli peace, resonate with the regional projects of the current time. So next slide, please, Natasha. So how can we elevate it? I think I already mentioned this in the previous slide. It's by highlighting Palestinian agency. So we always talk about a Palestinian state, but we're talking about, well, how can is this Palestinian state ready for the challenges of the 21st century? We always, we're overlooking, I think, Palestinian agency and what the state will look like. And I think it would be good to really connect it and address the Palestinian occupation, or the Israeli occupation of Palestine, through a rhetoric of business, that, okay, they cannot move forward if there is, the occupation, in other words, is not conducive to a thriving economic region. And therefore, that's one way of addressing it. And perhaps changing the name from Arab Peace Initiative to Middle East Peace Initiative. So next slide, please. So now here's the current landscape in the region. The Abraham Accords changed expectations in Israel. It made people think that, okay, Saudi Arabia and others are just going to join immediately. I don't think so. I think the people in the bottom here, they really look like nice people, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, but they're actually not very nice people, and they don't have very many nice things to say about others. And this is a very right-wing government, which I think Natasha will speak to, not to them, but speak about. And then there's regional economic visions. And here, clearly, we've seen just recently, Iran and Saudi Arabia normalize relations. And so, this whole anti-Iranian front was far-fetched. And so, how can we create a framework of peace that is conducive to creating more space to cooperate. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide, please. That's my mistake.
No, sorry, this is, yeah, where I come in very briefly. 'cause I
Okay,
know we're
sorry.
Probably running out of time about autocratization in Israel, and circling back to what was said before about the Abraham Accords, and really not much was given up on the Israeli side, and that the US did a lot of the legwork there. And really, it was just a win-win situation for Israel. And this, in the context of Israel autocratizing more and becoming more and more authoritarian, is going to make it much more difficult actually to make any kind of inroads in getting some sort of compromise out of the Israeli side, at least with extremist coalition members in key position, and the fact that Netanyahu keeps consolidating more power into his own hands in this coalition with the far right and some of the ultra orthodox partners, that there really isn't any incentive at all to provide any kind of concession. And so this slide just goes over some of the different things that are happening in Israel at the moment, but how would this environment lead to making any positive steps that really would be necessary for any kind of neo-Arab peace initiative to happen? Because there's increasing expansion into the settlements, more and more that this is happening, and they're even taking it upon themselves to make legal settlements that were considered illegal in the past. It's putting, Israel and the peace process in a real difficult situation here. And Haaretz, a newspaper in Israel, warned that Netanyahu is sowing the seeds of anarchic chaos, hatred, and violence, which are leading Israel to catastrophe and possibly a point of no return. So the timing in some ways couldn't be worse. But it's also to highlight the fact that what happened with the Abraham Accords was really an economic arrangement that benefited Israel without it giving up anything really that would be really necessary to moving things forward. And so over to you. Aziz.
Okay, thank you, Natasha. And I really appreciate what Natasha said, because she reminded me of something very important, because against the backdrop of the Abraham Accords, it was considered, the UAE officials said that this was in exchange for the stopping of annexation. And therefore, well, if it was a stopping of annexation, in return for the ceasement of annexation, we will then normalize relations with you, trying to resonate a little bit with that land for peace paradigm. But actually it was far-fetched, because that's absent in the UAE-Israel deal. And not only that, what speaks to it even more is that the current framework of the Abraham Accords did not stop the rhetoric that Natasha mentioned in the earlier slides, or the previous slide, regarding the annexation. They're still building more settlements. They're still building more of these things. So it's a limited framework. But now how can we leverage that relationship with this, with the practicalities and the realities of the ground? So I think, what can we do to incentivize Israel is to, and the Israeli politics, is that they could have a process of transactional steps towards normalization. So what this means is that, well, if you stop settlements, then you may open, in exchange, you could open a trade office. You could have more flyover rights. Of course, flyover rights is something that now that's not for negotiation, because they already gained that. But such a transactional nature will get things on the ground. If you allow more Palestinian freedom of movement within the occupied territories, we could then arrange something else for you. So there is this aspect of transactionality. And I think what this spectrum here shows is really of how we could use and leverage some of the Abraham Accord countries and Israel to invest in Palestinian territories, or invest in the process of peace, using them, because it does create evidence. We don't want to throw it away. It's there. We don't want to say, well, like the previous speaker said, there is some credence in it. But also we've seen, changes in political geopolitics where, perhaps the Palestinian issue is an issue where many countries that may be at loggerheads agree to, like, for example, Saudi Arabia and Iran. And by the way, we did this slides before the normalization. So now the normalization really does speak to the fact that, okay, now there is scope for cooperation and there is scope at least for building a new neo-Arab peace initiative. And I think that's really what we have to say. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you all very much for listening. Looking forward to your questions.
Yeah, sure. So any question? Question? Okay.
Are there questions in the chat?
Yes. We are checking there. Yes. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I would like to point out that perhaps for those of us live in the audience, your slides were a little bit too heavily text and difficult to read. But I think I got the gist of what you were saying. All these propositions for how we can come to peace in the Middle East seem to me, after 70 some years, to be on, forgive me, the border of absurdism, because clearly Israel is not going in that direction. What is the reality of what can be done? I don't see either the US Congress or the US presidential administration or Israel willing to go in any direction that precludes Israel gaining territory as a Jewish state and displacing its Arab residents.
Thank
Do
you.
you want to go for that, or?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the question. It may seem absurd to many people, but I think as researchers of Arab-Israeli relations, and by the way, I never call it Arab-Israeli, I rarely call it Arab-Israeli conflict. I call it Arab-Israeli relations because over the years and decades, actually Arabs and Israelis have always found ways to cooperate, found ways to communicate, found ways to agree on things. So the problem is that how we are retreating history. If we're looking back at history and looking at it as missed opportunities, then really the future won't look good because we're not treating history very good. But if we're going to treat history as really platforms where we almost reached peace, and because peace was almost reached, but unfortunately it was still elusive, and it was elusive because it was people politicized the Palestinian-Israeli antagonism too much. So what needs to happen is, of course, is not just a top-down issue, which is what you alluded to. I think there needs to be a bottom-up issue, which is a more social issue, and how people treat and depict each other. Now, what's taken place, to be honest with you, what's taken place in Israel is not very flattering now and not conducive to peace, but also what takes place in the Arab world is also not very flattering towards Israel. And therefore, there has to be a change and a revision of how people treat and perceive these lost opportunities. I hope I answered your question.
Yes. So is there any question? Yes, no? Okay, so if it's no, then I guess we have one question from the online. So what is the future of the relationship between Sudan and Israel? And is there the belief that Sudan will reach the stage of final signing? And what is the addition that Sudan or Israel can achieve to build a stable relationship in the Middle East? So do you want to answer this question?
I'll be happy to engage with this question, but I think the question was asked to the previous speaker. So in respect,
I mean, for the question. Is it? Well, so do you want to answer, sir? Yes.
The question, please, again.
So what is the future of the relationship between the Sudan and Israel? Is there a belief that Sudan will reach to the stage of final signing? What is the addition that Sudan or Israel can achieve to build stable relationship in the Middle East?
This very good question, and also very complicated question, considering the complicated situation in Sudan. The military are refusing to step down from power or sharing effectively with civilian government. And I believe this will not help the peace process between Sudan and Israel. Israel is a democratic state, and in order for Israel to have a good working relationship with Sudan, the Sudanese regime has to be more open and allow civil society to participate more in the process, and also to encourage Sudanese business to start to have partnership with Israeli business. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. So if there is no question, then I would love to end. Do you have a question? Okay, we have 6 minutes left if you want to ask question. Sure.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I've been seeing some analysis around the idea that the radicalization of the Israeli government and the increasing kind of blatant anti-democratic movement and what the government is trying to do will open up more space in the international community to be able to pressure Israel through the international court or some kind of more organized international state boycott like we saw against apartheid in South Africa. And I was just curious whether you would agree with that analysis or whether you think that's naive to hope for, and just any comments on that.
Natasha, do you want to go for it?
Go ahead and I'll add at the end.
Okay, so yeah, your point was very on point. It was a good point, and not only this, but I think one of the good things about that is one of the silver linings, I would say, is that it's really highlighting the fact that how many people in the Israeli society have these values that are about peace, are about rapprochement with Arabs, and that they are just against this kind of, you know, forgive me for a lack of a better phrase, but fascistic kind of discourse that's taking place. And it is becoming more susceptible, but that's really the debate that's taking place within Israel. I think I'm not Israeli, but what I'm following in Israel is that fact that, you know, I think this government is losing the support that it used to have internationally because of its democratic values. Now, do I think that the United States, et cetera, will change its relationship because it's less democratic? Personally, I don't think so. The United States has always dealt with all countries in the Middle East, and none of them are really democratic, and it never really stopped them. The American support to Israel, in my assessment, and one of the reasons, was not just motivated by shared values. I think shared values of democratic values is what elevated the relationship and protected the relationship, but it was also strategic, you know, and it came against the backdrop of 1967, where Israel and the United States American support to Israel was very balanced with its support to other Arab states. But then 1967 happened when it illustrated the fact that it was a real worthy ally to have, or a really worthy partner to have in the region. That's where that strategic interest and strategic support became more towards Israel. So I don't see the United States really withdrawing this. So I'm not very optimistic about it. So over to you, Natasha.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm not optimistic about it either, because of the reasons that Aziz just laid out, that the US will continue to support Israel no matter what, and it would require a huge change in policy to U-turn on this, or to change on this, that I don't see happening. And actually similarly, European partners will continue to support Israel as well, as there's all kinds of trade links there. And I don't see a big change happening. What I'm more interested in seeing is what happens domestically. And most of the protests thus far that have taken place, or the resistance that has been taking place to autocratization in Israel, has not really talked at all about the Palestinian element. And actually the 20% of Arabs that live in Israel have not been part of the protests at all. And so I see that these problems are actually very closely connected, and I think it will be important for the opposition, and it's more than 50% that voted against Netanyahu, to be somehow more united, which hasn't happened yet. They need to be united and clear on what their goals and objectives are, and the dangers of autocratization for their own country, but also for any kind of peace process. And we are not even close to being there yet. But that's where then, once the opposition is really united and clear, that's where there's a tipping point that the international community can make a very clear diplomatic statement, or even the threat of some kind of sanctions, and then it could work. But I would be looking to see what the Israeli opposition does in, the next months and years, as they try to combat autocratization taking place right now.
Well, I hope this answer your question. And so in this case, like personally, I would love to thanks to all of, the three speakers to participate in this panel. So then I will be, I guess, offlining. And thank you so much, everyone. Yes.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.